Thank you for joining our Ballot Initiatives webinar. FPWA is happy to be able to organize this webinar for all of us who are interested in learning more about what the ballot issues are going to be at this election on November 6th. For those of you that don't know, my name is Alicia Anthony. I am Director of Programs here at FPWA, and for 2 years now, FPWA has been organizing a civic engagement program. And so FPWA has been supporting agencies, nonprofit agencies, as they attempt to get more people in the community mobilized, educated, and doing the work of sustained engagement in their communities. So our agencies take on issues that we care about, and we use voting as a tool and mechanism to move those issues. And so we are glad that you had this time to join us this morning, and we look forward to learning as much as we can, sharing that information with others, and most importantly, getting out and voting in Tuesday's election. So with me today, I have a representative from the New York City Charter Commission who's going to help us understand what these ballot initiatives are. So once again, thank you very much.
Good morning. My name is Jorge Montalvo. I'm the Deputy Executive Director for Policy at the 2018 New York City Charter Revision Commission. And again, thank you to everyone that's on the line, on the webinar, and thank you to FPWA for giving us the opportunity to get this word out and let you know what's going on with the ballot. To start, I want to make sure you all understand, much like FPWA and its nonprofit status, and much like us with the city government, I am going to talk to you in a very neutral manner, explaining the process, explaining what's on the ballot, and the rationale for why the commissioners, the commission in total, put these ballot questions on, these questions on the ballot for New Yorkers to consider. So just for everyone to feel comfortable, you should all know that this is not going to be a political conversation. It is substantive, and we'll let you know what's on the ballot and how you and your folks can get people involved and educate New Yorkers about the issues. But don't worry about me telling you voting yes or no or breaking any of those sorts of rules. This will definitely not be one of those opportunities. I also want to encourage you, as you are on the webinar, to raise your hand or to ask questions. There's a window on the side or as part of this webinar where people can introduce themselves, ask questions as we go along, and at the end of this, we'll we'll be watching and monitoring the questions as they come along, but I'll answer as many questions as people have after the formal presentation. And then for those that are worried, this presentation is being recorded and will be available not just for you to review, but also to send out to people after this is all over. All right, so let's start. So, okay. So on election day, there will be 3 important questions on the ballots for voters to decide. The ballot questions will ask voters to decide on possible amendments to the New York City Charter. The New York City Charter is like our city's constitution. It kind of lays out the duties and responsibilities of the government, and kind of the structure, the powers of the agencies. So it's a really kind of like important document that helps guide and structure the city. And every so often, a mayor can call on a group of individuals to review the whole city charter. And that's the law. The law calls for, when you call a charter revision commission, you have to include and review the entire city charter, which is kind of a big undertaking because it's rather a large document and rather important task. There have been, in the history of New York City, 15. This is the 15th Charter Revision Commission. The last one was in 2010. So if you really think about it, in the history of New York City, since the late 1800s, et cetera, a consolidated city, there have not been that many of these charter revision commissions. And so each time this happens, it's kind of like it's almost a re-education for the public to know it's going on, that eventually these commissions, if they have enough ideas that come in and enough momentum, they might put something on the ballot and then to educate the public on what's on the ballot. In this case, the mayor started talking about the commission. He was going to appoint one back at the State of the City address earlier this year. He appointed the commission in April, and in the process, it set up a process by which we heard from the public. Series of public meetings, hearings across the city in each of the boroughs, smaller meetings with members from the disability community, from immigrant communities, from all sort of like focus grouped areas and neighborhoods, supplemented the larger public hearings in each borough. There were also teletown halls, Twitter town halls to hear from people, and people were able to submit, New York was able to submit ideas online, in snail mail, and also we were talking earlier about social media. That means Facebook and Twitter, and people sent in ideas, and overall, we ended up with more than 1,000 ideas on how to change the city charter. And you know, it was a really interesting process. Even as people came in with these ideas, the commission would then get together and have their meetings amongst the commissioners to discuss what they heard and the policy considerations. And I'm sure people on the phone have been used to going to public meetings, and then these commissions or boards have like an executive session that's outside of the public view. This was very different. Every time there was a quorum to discuss the policy matters or discuss what's going on, they were in public view, which means that if anyone wanted to, they then, and obviously still now on the web, they can go and watch these meetings, not just the public hearings, but when the commissioners themselves debated whether they should move forward on some issues or not, if things were complicated and what the complications were, what they should think through. It really kind of gives you an insight into how policy, at least in this process, is done. And for me, having been in government for well over close to 2 decades at this point, it was an interesting process to see that, because traditionally policymaking isn't always in bird's eye view like that. Well, after that whole process and public comments and all that, we ended up with 3 ballot questions for New Yorkers to decide on. And the 3 questions are on the topics of campaign finance, civic engagement, and community boards. So I'll go through each one of these, but I do want to make note that the actual language that a voter will see on their ballot when they walk into their poll site on Tuesday is available on our website, which is flipyourballot.nyc. If you make a mistake and you flipyourballot.com, that also goes there. We own that website. And I think we also have .org and .net just to make sure, but it's flipyourballot.nyc. And that language there, also with a larger explanation of each of the ballot questions, very similar to what we're going to go through today. So on the first question, it deals with campaign finance. As you know, or as many of you may know, that in New York, if you run for office, they have what's called the model of how to finance campaigns based on the New York City model, which is that if you run, a system has been set up where there is public funding for campaigns. And lots of other places in the country have emulated this system over the years. But as we went around the city, and frankly, it was also kind of the charge from the mayor to look at taking kind of the big money out of politics to address ultimately the underpinnings, which is that people feel, the public felt, and we heard it all across the city, that there is a persistent perception of corruption linked to large campaign donations. I don't think I have to tell anybody, if you watch the news or get into a newspaper or whatever, however you consume your news or your news feed, how disheartening it can be in our democracy to see people year after year go to jail because they took some donation or there was some level of corruption. And the campaign finance system was set up originally to try to address that. Yet, when we were going around the city, people felt that even today, even with our model system, that it needed to be strengthened, because there are still big dollar donations that were kind of corrupting our elected officials, and in particular, it was frankly eye-opening when even sitting city council members came to testify and essentially said, hey, if you're donating $5,000+ to somebody, you better expect that they're expecting something in return. And that set off our alarm bells. Like, wow, the public believes that this is still an issue. We should address it. So what the proposal in number 1 calls for is kind of a package. It calls for reducing campaign contribution limits on people running for office in New York City, particularly, specifically, that's mayor, people running for controller, public advocate, the borough presidents, and the New York City Council. It cuts that percent by people who are in this campaign finance system by more than 60%. So it's a pretty dramatic drop. It also increases the amount of public money that is provided to a candidate, but only on the small donations. So in essence, you're taking the bigger money out of the body politic, if this were to pass. And you're asking the public to consider the idea that let's also add more money so then that $25, that $50, that $100 donation that someone can kind of cobble together from people in the community, especially if they have a large network, but maybe not a large network of big people, people with big money, that they can see that amplified. Right now, the current system says for every dollar you bring in, you get that amplified by 6 by the city government. So for that $1, essentially you got $7. And in this case, we're saying, let's go for every dollar up to 8, but only on the small donations. So for citywide, it's a little over $200, it's $250, and for all the other seats, it's $175. So again, we're adding more public money to shift the system to a smaller dollar donation system. It also allows for more of your campaign to be funded by these public dollars. And let's say you're running for office today, and you're in this public matching system. You actually don't get your money when you're running, the public money that you qualified for and that you've shown you're a viable candidate and are able to access until roughly about August, early August. The primary is in September. That does not give you that much time to set up kind of like a strong campaign and really plan things out. So this proposal also allows for people to get the money essentially as they are running for office earlier in the process, so starting in the year that they're running. So that would be like the first disbursement could be as early as February in the year they're running, which we think will help kind of make the system more fair for people running. And that was a consideration. That's about question number 1. Question 2, and I'm sure this is very interesting to a lot of you on the phone. I know that the Federation has for years had a strong education and engagement effort around civics and trying to get more people involved in civic life in New York City. This question deals directly with that. The motivation here, the rationale, is as we were going around the city, we heard from New Yorkers that it's not just that the voting numbers are low, which they are, because civic engagement, civic life is not just predicated on one day every year or one day every 4 years or a cycle like that. It's about getting more people just involved in civic life, regardless of their background, regardless of their orientation or where they come from or their documented status. We want, the commission heard that people wanted New Yorkers to feel like they can fully engage in city life. To do that, they decided to propose to the public to consider, to voters, creating what they call a Civic Engagement Commission, charged with some of these detail, this idea, but with specific, and I want to make sure you understand that, specific outcomes, specific deliverables, and again, to enhance public participation, to promote civic trust, and to strengthen democracy in New York City as the goals, but with specific civic outcomes. And I think that's really important, or programs, because you could say, oh, let's create a commission, create an office. And if it's loosey-goosey, I think too often, I think many of us have been in and around government long enough to know, like, that's swell, and that's great, and maybe we can help shape it, and this can happen here too. But if you don't have something specific behind you with a mandate, what is the expectation, right? So, and that's what the commissioners felt. To start off, this commission, so you understand, would be a 15-member panel. These are all volunteers, except for one person who serves on the commission as the chair, and as the executive director of the actual function of the office. But generally, 15 members. They have appointments from the mayor, the speaker, a couple from the speaker of the city council, and one from each of the borough presidents. You know, when you create an office like you could now, like the mayor could create a new office under his duties and responsibilities as a mayor, and like almost every other office in city government, you can just say, hey, I'm in charge, I'm no board, I'm just creating like an office, and here's who's in charge. This was contemplated to say, let's go beyond that. You know, let's have a real kind of a mix of people with different voices. There's some structural pieces that require that the appointments consider people from limited English proficient communities, from the disability community, from really kind of like getting a diverse group of people to serve on the board. Interestingly enough, I should say, not funny enough, but interesting enough, it also requires at least from one of the appointees from the mayor's side, at least one person who is from the second largest political party represented in the city. So essentially, at least one Republican. And so again, all of these things to add more of a structure than what generally could just have been a mayoral agency. So now what is it going to do? The proposal for the public to consider would call on this commission to implement a citywide version of what's called participatory budgeting. Some of you may know of participatory budgeting. This is a process by which the public, essentially, in each neighborhood, gets to decide on projects to undertake to fix their community. They come up with the projects, and then there's a local vote on which of the 20,000 or however many number of projects that people come up with and develop and hone over time gets to actually be funded. This exists now through the city council in a number of districts around the city, but not everywhere. And when we heard from New Yorkers, like, we love this, it's a great idea, it gets more people involved, and there's a study that shows that people, particularly in New York City, but also studies outside of New York City in places like Madrid and Brazil and other places, that say that when people get involved in making those local decisions, they get more involved generally in civic life, even outside of the budgeting, this program process. So right now there are a bunch of districts that do this in the city council with the city council's discretionary money, and it seems to be working well. What we're saying is, let's not leave any neighborhood out, and let's have this be something that's citywide, not requiring the city council to do that, but actually putting up the capital budget. I was doing our interview yesterday with the Gotham Gazette's podcast, and when we said this, the interviewer said, well, essentially, isn't the capital budget just dictated by the mayor? I will not, again, I'm in an aggressively neutral stance, but people do think that, and that is, but it technically is part of the budgetary process. But if you think about it that way, whether reality or otherwise, you would then say, whoa, this actually would then increase access to more funding to people and communities that have a say. Like, they're going to have a say over more of that particular multi-billion-dollar pot of money. The actual number will still be, if this were to pass, would be negotiated out between the city council and the mayor as part of the budget process. The second piece of the civic, so that's like a hard deliverable. The second hard deliverable would be to expand language access services at poll sites. We are only a couple of days away from the election, and which is why I'm here, to tell people to flip your ballot and vote on these issues as you're going to vote, yes or no. But as we know from people that we work with and just from past experience, I think we have an understanding that not every language is covered when you go to a poll site. In fact, the federal government, through the Voters' Right Act, kind of has a certain number of languages that need to be provided by a local board of elections. And so in New York, the Board of Elections, under the law, covers 4 languages. It's Spanish, Chinese, that's Mandarin and Cantonese, Korean, and Bengali. Yet it's not in every district. There's a formula. We know generally, and this is what we heard also from the public, reinforced, based on the data, based on people's experience, that those are not the only languages spoken in New York City. And so the goal here was to try to help ensure that the public, when they go to vote, they can actually have access to language services. New York City, as the mayor, as a city council, cannot pass a local law that kind of forces the Board of Elections to do things like that. The Board of Elections runs, follows their law, federal law and state law, but they're a creature of the state government. So we said, well, what can we do? The city government, through the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs, has over the last several years done a poll site project that tries to expand and provide these services to people in different communities. I think this year they're going up to almost 100 poll sites. This would say, let's codify that and actually let's create a mechanism, a methodology by which we can then add languages, becomes non-political, that we can just and have an advisory committee that helps kind of set up this type of system that provides language assistance at the poll sites. And that would be run by or charged by, if this were to pass, by the Civic Engagement Commission. And then the third hard deliverable is the idea that I think there's a lot of really good work through you all on the ground who do this work, through the city government, through others, on the issue of civic engagement and getting people prepared and ready to be part of civic life. Yet it seems like, and it's what we heard, that people are, it's not siloed, but it's not like amplified and reinforced in a way that's coordinated. Like that there's a missing coordination function amongst everyone that's doing this work, particularly inside the city government and city government connecting with those on the outside. And then so the hard deliverable there would be to work with community-based organizations, civic leaders, and other city agencies to connect those. And obviously when we all know when you come in coalition and work together, the message becomes amplified and the work becomes stronger. That's question number 2. The question number 3 goes to community boards. And so I think that many of you may know that there are 59 community boards in New York City. Each community board is staffed by a couple of staff people, but largely is a mix of people, of 50 people per community board is the maximum, 25 appointed by the borough president, and 25 also appointed by the borough president at the recommendation of the local city council member or by recommendation by a nonprofit or other kind of organized civic organization who can put in that recommendation to the borough president. These have been around the city government for decades, and they play full disclosure, I served on my local community board in the South Bronx for several years. They serve a very vital and important role in civic life, and that's what we heard from people, that these are important, essentially local town halls by which information gets out, and their main functions, as far as like a thing that they do beyond bringing people together and doing the important part of getting the word out and getting people linked into what's happening in the community, are on issues of liquor licenses and on land use. They have an advisory role in the land use process. As we went around the city, people were very clear with us. That included sitting city council members, sitting borough community board members, people who try to get on community boards, people who've gotten off community boards, and the general public who said, these are important, we really appreciate people volunteer time, it's really admirable. Yet, we are not seeing that many of the community boards are not as reflective as they could be of the community in which they serve. There are people that have been on these boards for so long that they have not, because they've been on for so long, they've not allowed for other long-term residents to serve on the community boards. And at times, the boards look a certain way or represent an ideology of a certain way, and those communities have totally changed. And you have more immigrants coming to a community and more other folks coming to a community, and it's not reflective of the diversity. For that reason, when the but yet they serve such an important role, they're also under-resourced. And so and we also don't know exactly how people get on. The appointments process, the application process, et cetera, was just so opaque. So the commissioners heard this. They also heard from people who said, you know, when you serve on these boards for so long, you pick up knowledge, not just of the community and the community voice, but also of how the land use process and other processes in the city run, and you're better equipped to engage in the process. So hearing all of this information about this institutional knowledge, this need for diversification and opening up new seats, and the general underpinnings of what we heard was like, also was that people felt this idea that, or felt this need that, you know, when you're trying to organize people and get people more involved in civic life, you open up spaces for people to not just talk about getting involved, but open up spaces for them to actually lead and be part of the process. So putting this all together, the commission has placed on the ballot for New Yorkers to consider a proposal on community boards that first call for the establishment of term limits on community board members and a change to the application process and additional resources to address the need that people said that the community boards had on the process. On term limits, the term limits would establish 4 two-year terms, so 8 years for someone to serve on a community board, after which you then have 1 term that you would be required to come off the board, so a 2-year process. During that 2 years, like any other person, and quite frankly, if you've been on the board and you're a community leader, you know how to get your voice heard. So, you know, people would be able to come to meetings, to serve on committees, to represent the community board, but essentially do all the things you could do on a community board, except for voting on things that come before them in their advisory capacity. After those 2 years, you can apply to come back on, and then serve another 8 years, or up to 8 years. So it's, you know, it didn't go as far as some people wanted, which was, you know, kind of retroactive. You've been on 20 years, you shouldn't be able back on. It doesn't force anyone to like not come back on ever again. It's again this balancing act that we try to do as a commission. The term limits of the 8 years and then 2 years off would only kick in if this were to pass starting April of the following year, which means that if this were to pass, everyone that's been on, whether they've been on 1 year or they've been on 20 years, 30 years, would start off with 0 years counting towards their term limit. So it's not that this passes and someone just like automatically gets kicked off. You know, you'd have 8 years, during which time we hope that institutional knowledge would not be held by people, but would be held by the institution, meaning like people would kind of, you know, expand the breadth of that information to all the people on the board in kind of a good organizer's mentality. But outside of that, to balance out some, you know, potential loss for institutional knowledge, the city government would also be providing community boards with additional resources through these ballot questions. The additional resource, in particular in land use and in language access, amongst other things, but in particular, those two were called out in the legislation that underpinned the questions. The resources would then say the new Civic Engagement Commission would host, you know, a list of experts, nonprofit, for-profit, that the community boards would then be able to go to and say, here are some independent folks who are not conflicted, who could help you better participate in the land use decision process. And I think that's really important because that's, again, what we heard from the public of additional resources needed and expertise needed. And that in some community boards, they have more needs for this sort of stuff. There's a rezoning coming up or a lot of building going on, versus others where there's a lot less. And so this provides for this access through the Civic Engagement Commission to host these type of resources. And then the last piece, which was interesting, was, and is part of this question, is the application process. The application process for community boards now is very mixed. In one borough, it's a 1-page application process. In another borough, it's a 12-page application process with essays. So it's very uneven. A city council member yesterday at a press conference I watched on TV talking about these issues mentioned that when he first came on the board, first came on the city council, was going around and bringing in applications to get people to apply, and that he was chastised for doing that by people because they had not ever had to at times reapply or have other people come on. It's very uneven. Some people don't know how to apply. It's never been open in a real way, except with some exceptions. There's Manhattan in particular has had history since Scott Stringer of trying to do some good things, but it's still uneven. So what this calls for is, first is a baseline for applications, so that there's at least a kind of a common application process upon which that, you know, if borough president wants to add more, they could, but that is a common application process that will be online. It also requires the borough president to report each year on some things like demographics of community boards, on who appointed community boards, that there are open spots or not on the community board, when someone was on, what the borough president did to recruit for community board members, and how they made their decisions on how to, you know, generally on how people came on the boards. That type of sunlight or transparency, disclosure, you know, people in the public felt like would help really strengthen the process and might get more people interested, knowing, oh, this is like a thing that's open now, so maybe I should apply. And that's what we've heard from the public. These are the 3 questions that are before New Yorkers on Tuesday, on November 6th. When you go to the ballot box, traditionally on one side, there are candidates. And we have a lot of races going on this year, the midterm election, and I know people are energized. But on the back side of the ballot, there are these 3 questions. And so what we're telling people across New York City is to flip their ballot and vote on the issues. These are issues that affect people in New York, that affect kind of the structure and nature of the government and how it runs. You know, and there's an intention here that is designed to help strengthen the democracy. This is, you know, some people call it it's sleepy issues, right? They're not things that are every day, but so I always like to tell people who say that are like, well, sewers aren't either until they don't work, right? This is a part of an infrastructure that's really important to city life, and we hope that people, A, come out and vote, and B, flip their ballot, vote on the issues, and we have a lot of information on the flipyourballot.nyc website about all that. You all, as community leaders, as members of the Federation, and in your home nonprofits, this is not political, right? Just to tell people to get educated and to get out and vote. It's a civic thing. And so we have information on that website too, or you can contact us directly about getting information. We have flyers, and all that information is in 12 languages. They're very pretty. We have a TV ad up that people are starting to see, and we're on radio and print, and we really are just trying to make sure people know to come out on Tuesday, to flip their ballot, and vote on these issues. So with that, that's the end of my formal presentation. I think that we'll take any questions that people have, and we'll check here onto the little chat box. Again, anything that people have questions on, you should feel free to write into the chat box and ask, and we'll take questions. I'll open up with some of the questions that we've been hearing from the public. I think one of the questions we heard recently was about the ballot itself. You may have started to see a couple of weeks ago that the Board of Elections, which runs the elections, they have a new ballot design this year. On Staten Island, it's very similar to what people are used to, which is from what I could tell from what the sample ballot that came out generally is that it's a double-sided, like one side the candidates and the other side the ballot question. But in the rest of the city, it appears that there is going to be almost like, I call it like a hymnal, for those who are of church-going ways. It's or essentially like a booklet. On one side, you have the candidates on the open side, and then you open up, and then there are two faces in the middle. One side has more candidates, and in some places also more candidates on the third side. And then you close your hymnal, and on the back are the questions, these ballot questions. The expectation there is that people hopefully will thoroughly vote. They'll vote on the whole ballot, and then you're expected to, on the perforated, on that middle end, rip your ballot and then scan it into the machine as two sheets. So that's a little complicated, but you know, it is something new and different, and the Board of Elections and New York City Votes, the folks who put out that voter guide are doing some ads as well, and we've been told that the Board of Elections has some extra training for their poll workers to help people understand how that works. The other thing that we've heard from New Yorkers about, their questions, is about the size of the font. It is hard to read the questions because their size is fairly small to make space for the translations and all that. And I just want to make sure you all know, and you should, if any of you work with seniors or with people who have issues seeing or reading small print, that there's a requirement that the poll sites have access, that voters have access to things like magnifying glasses. Most people don't know that. So if you know, if someone mentions, hey, or you know someone who may have issues reading the small print, they can have access to that, and they can have it. And then the last question people have asked us for generally is on these ballot questions, what happens if someone shows up? They haven't heard it. We've done all the best that we could to get this message out, to flip their ballot, and they see things on the back and like, what are these things? I mean, it's been 8 years, right, since there's been a ballot initiative or for these questions from the city government. People aren't used to doing questions, but they read them. They're like, I don't know if I should vote yes or no. They are able to go up to the people there at the poll site and say, do you have more details? And each poll site has a thing called an abstract. It's actually a couple of pages long that explain the details of each of the proposals. It's nonpartisan, it's neutral. It's just an explanation of what the proposals call for. So I think as far as questions go, I think those are the main questions that we've heard from and hit on. Again, thank you for your time, and hope you guys will go out and vote on Tuesday, November 6th, and you will flip your ballot and vote on the issues. And please tell your friends and family, and if you can, go on the website. There are some shareables for social media and all that stuff. So thank you again for your time, and have a great day.